No music? Hi, I'm Scott Beaulieu, Director of the Manuel H. Johnson Center for Political Economy here at Troy University. I'm the host of the show eConversations. Thanks for tuning in. Last week on our show, I talked to you all about the importance of economic freedom and the role economic freedom plays in promoting wealth, prosperity, and the good life. Tonight I'm joined by one of my new colleagues, Dr. Daniel Smith, who comes to us from George Mason University. He recently earned his PhD in economics at George Mason, and he's been trained in free enterprise economics. And he's going to talk to us more about the themes that I introduced to you all last week. Economic freedom, capitalism, what these terms mean, what's underpinning them, what's behind them, and why they're so important for prosperity. So Dan, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Let's get right into it and talk about this term capitalism, what capitalism means to people and what it means to economists. When I hear the word capitalism, I think of it in terms of ownership and how resources are assigned rights. Do I as an individual own them, or does some other entity own them? Is that really what capitalism is about, ownership?
Yeah, absolutely. Capitalism is the ownership of the means of production. So to give the widest scope for individuals to use their unique talents, passions, experience, and knowledge of particular circumstances to allocate resources to best provide and serve other people. The alternative to capitalism, of course, would be taking the rights, decision-making rights, and making them exclusive domain of only a few people, whereas capitalism allows everyone to input their knowledge and their experiences into the allocation of resources.
So we're talking about rights over land, also labor, and maybe ideas as well. Is that, it's more than just land that we're talking about?
Yes, absolutely. It's the resources necessary to create the goods and services we consume on an everyday basis in America. The resources that we have are all provided for us, everything we consume, from the coffee in the morning to the donuts we eat for during lunchtime, all the way to the steak we eat at dinner, are all provided by people owning those resources and allocating them in order to provide us with those goods and services when we want them.
I often hear people equate capitalism and democracy, like the two kind of go together. But really, capitalism, the opposite of that would be socialism or common ownership. The opposite of democracy is maybe dictatorship. Is that how we should be thinking about this? And why do people often equate capitalism and democracy? Is there some kind of connection between the two?
Yeah, that's a good question. Democracy is a means to obtain an end. Our founding fathers sought with the American experiment to procure liberty and the rule of law in order so that we can freely exchange with each other to create prosperity. They thought democracy was the best way to achieve that end. Yet one of the best ways for democracy to achieve that end is constantly examine it, look for the dangers and pitfalls of democracy, as well as ways to improve it. Nobel laureate James Buchanan actually won his Nobel Prize in part for his research program that looked at why the pitfalls of democracy and explored why contemporary democratic setting sometimes was incapable of achieving those ends of liberty to create the prosperity that we all enjoy. The economist Christopher Coyne actually looked at the ability to impose democratic institutions around the world using military institutions, the U.S. military. And he found out that our ability, judging it according to their own measures of success of the U.S. military, found that when we intervene in other countries to impose democracy, they're more likely to end up in failure than success. So a lot of times, democracy does not equal freedom. You have to account for the local culture and history of a place, as well as understand that a lot of times when democracy is imposed prematurely, it can oftentimes lead to the opposite of democracy, rule of the majority in a lot of cases.
So what we've done to continue with this foreign policy discussion a little bit, what we've been doing, we being the U.S. when we intervene in other countries, we've been trying to impose democracy when maybe we should be looking at trying to, we don't want to talk about imposing really, but maybe what is needed in some of these places is ownership and property instead. One of my favorite economists, Milton Friedman, once was quoted as saying, just privatize, 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 and you'll solve a lot of the world's problems. Is that more what you're saying? It's not like let's go out and transplant democracy where people can vote on things, but instead let's try to bring ownership to other parts of the world?
Yeah, absolutely. To the extent that we can maximize the economic sphere, the freedom of individuals to allocate resources according to their own knowledge and circumstances, and limit the role that government plays in orchestrating how those resources are allocated, you will maximize the welfare and prosperity of a nation. One of the most established relationships in all of social sciences is the relationship between economic freedom and economic growth. And economic growth by itself is also correlated with health outcomes, standard of living, just different measures, happiness, different measures of well-being that we all enjoy. So one of the best ways to obtain that is to maximize the role of the private sector and increase or allow private provision of those goods.
Is there any limit to how far we should go with private provision? You know, we went over some slides in my first show last week, and I showed some of the correlations you mentioned. Freer societies, ones where you have private ownership, have higher literacy rates. They have higher life expectancy. People eat better in these places. But you know, should we draw a line and say certain things should be provided by private individuals, and some things like education or roads should be provided by the government? Is there a line as you see it, or you know, should almost everything be pushed towards the private sector? Why do we have some things provided by the government?
In general, a good rule of thumb to follow is what economists call the yellow pages test. If you can open up a phone book and find that service provided by a local private company or a private company, then you should contract out for that service to those private companies. I would say that in large there is no limit to the ability to privatize. We can go into education and roads. The limitations are more in the time frame. If we were going to privatize the U.S. postal system, it would take a while for the entrepreneurs to adjust and allocate into that field. Right now, there's not a lot of entrepreneurial talent allocated to discovering how best to deliver first-class mail. But if we were going to privatize the U.S. postal system and announce it ahead of time, then those entrepreneurs would allocate, those resources would be there in time for us to transition to private mail delivery.
Private mail delivery sounds pretty appealing.
Absolutely.
I'm never sure what time my mail is going to come, and it often takes a really long time to get here, especially when I'm waiting on checks. It seems like it takes forever. You know, of course, if I could get someone else to pay a lot of money to send me a check, it could arrive more quickly. But I'm sure speedy, cheap mail could happen if we had a private post office or some kind of equivalent. European countries actually have privatized their postal services in many cases.
Yes, absolutely. I haven't checked if the figure is current, but I know about a decade ago, economists did the calculations, and it's cheaper to send a barrel of oil halfway around the world than it is to send a letter across the street to your neighbor.
Wow. That's insane. Let's turn, I want the theme tonight to be on three areas. We've covered private property a little bit. I'd also like to talk about the market, which I think is a fundamental institution to free societies. And then we'll get into profit and loss and the role that that plays as well. Let's transition a little bit to the market and try to explain to people why that's so important to capitalist economies and what economists mean by free markets. When I think of free markets, I think of an arrangement in which people pay what they're willing to pay, but also what they, in some sense, should be paying, where the prices that we're paying reflect the true costs of the goods and services we're consuming. Let me give you a quick example. The other day I was out for a walk, And it was the day after Tropical Storm Lee. We had just received 4 inches of rain, and everywhere in my neighborhood there were sprinklers running. The day after Hurricane Lee, or Tropical Storm Lee, sprinklers everywhere. And I just shook my head and said to myself, this is largely the result of markets not working. And it's not really markets not working, it's that we're not paying the true cost of water. Maybe water should be a little more expensive, but it's heavily subsidized, and we're not really paying the full price. Is that a correct notion of markets, that people should just be paying for what they're consuming?
Yeah, absolutely. Your example of a hurricane is really appropriate, because a lot of times in the aftermath of a disaster, the disaster makes those resources like water, ice, plywood, candles in higher demand.
Yep.
So it's not capitalism that raises the price, it's the disaster that raises the price. And it's only by allowing capitalist forces to work, allowing prices to rise, that you're going to get capitalist forces, entrepreneurs trying to get that price down, as well as consumers allocating resources and conserving them more appropriately. For example, following Hurricane Katrina, price of plywood around the U.S. rose, especially in the area around New Orleans, where it's in the most demand. So that provided entrepreneurs with the information that that's precisely where that plywood was needed the most. And it provided incentives for people all the way up in Michigan to buy up plywood, ship it down in a truck, and take it to where it was most needed.
What about those who, I've written on this, and after Hurricane Katrina, I was in the state of Georgia, and at the time they tried to impose price controls on gasoline. So they regulated the price of gasoline and prevented gas prices from rising. And as an economist, I was saying, this is a good thing. Let prices rise. It's the best thing that you can do for people, not only in New Orleans, but in Alabama and in Georgia. But again and again, you hear people say, but that's not fair. I shouldn't have to pay $50 for a sheet of plywood. I shouldn't have to pay $6 for a gallon of gasoline. How do you respond to the fairness argument that often confronts you at every corner, whether it's after hurricanes or if you're talking about healthcare? It's not fair that I should have to pay for all of my health procedures. How do you address that, or how do free enterprise economists like yourself address that?
Well, what I say is look out around the world, as well as throughout all of human history, and look at the societies where the least well-off in society are the best off. And it's precisely in those societies where they allow the free market prices to dictate the allocation of resources. And it's in those societies where the societies where the least well-off are relatively the worst off, is in precisely those societies where they attempt to obtain a fair distribution of resources. Because then you run into the problem where people don't have the information and incentives to provide and allocate resources to where they're most highly demanded and will serve the most number of people.
You mentioned information and incentives. So a core function then of this market system is to give people the information that they need about what? What is it conveying to us that's so important? And why is it that we can't just try to step in and control it to some extent? You're suggesting there's value in the system.
Yeah, absolutely. There's human beings have a knowledge constraint, epistemic limitation to their ability to understand the entire world and what's going on in the entire world. Yes, we all knew that Hurricane Katrina hit, and we think, yes, water, ice, flashlights are probably in higher demand there. So maybe just out of our kindness of our heart, we can say, I'll refrain from purchasing those. But look down the road 6 months when those resources are still in high demand, but you're not thinking about that as much. Even without having to consider all of those disasters going around in the world, all those conditions that affect the supply conditions of every good we consume, we automatically adjust our behavior as consumers to conserve resources or switch from using one type of metal to another type of metal in the products we're producing in order to respond to the conditions around the world without having to know about what's going on. We don't have to understand the intricate and complicated supply conditions of tin. We just have to understand that the price of tin went up, and therefore we're going to conserve on products that use tin and look for substitutes for tin.
And so when we intervene in the tin market, we being policymakers intervene, it distorts this information that we're receiving, just like in the gasoline example that we've been discussing too. If you say as a policymaker that gasoline should be $2, but really the prevailing underlying conditions make it $5, people get all messed up in the decisions they make, and it distorts the market then.
Yes, absolutely. It's going to create shortages when the price isn't as high as it should be. People won't conserve, so if you're just going to top off your tank, well, if the gas is only $2 a gallon, you're going to top up your tank. But what if someone more desperately needs it, and their only ability to get that gas resources if the price rises, so it limits the amount that is purchased? Otherwise, you're going to have a shortage, and the people that desire gas and need it the most, say a delivery truck trying to move goods into an area after a hurricane, they need gas more than a person that's just topping off their tank just to ensure that they have enough gas just in case. Yeah. So it allocates those resources to where they'll serve the most number of people.
Okay. Let's connect the discussion of the market system and prices up with that last topic that I'd like to talk with you about, profits and losses. On our next show, which will be in later September, John Allison from BB&T is going to be visiting Troy. He's the former CEO of BB&T and chairman. He was running BB&T during the financial crisis of 2008. He has a very interesting story of what it was like being a bank executive during the financial crisis. When we look at that period, and there's still this rhetoric out there even to the present. There's the story that capitalism failed, okay, that free enterprise just naturally leads us to these periods of boom and bust and crisis. There's a story that it was human greed run amok. Self-interest unconstrained gets you the financial crisis of 2008. And what we need is a capitalist system that's heavily regulated and controlled. And you find this from politicians on the left and the right. Some economists have said this. It's a broad spectrum of people very hostile and skeptical of the free enterprise ideas that you're presenting to our viewers. How do you respond to that?
But my favorite response to that was actually by my dissertation advisor, Peter Bedke. And he said, well, what if we take Michael Phelps, tie him in chains and weights, and throw him in the pool? Are we going to conclude that Michael Phelps can't swim? No, we're not going to conclude that Michael Phelps can't swim. We're going to conclude that the chains and weights prevented him from swimming. Similarly, we know both empirically throughout history, as well as the theory of economics, suggests fully that free markets work. And when they don't work, we have to look at how they're being constrained and fettered. And in most cases, it comes down to excessive government regulation that prevents entrepreneurs from acting in the way that they would if they were operating in a free market environment. We economists talk about it's not just the pursuit of profit in the free market. It's the pursuit of profit curtailed by the fear of loss. And if you take away that fear of loss, you're just going to get excessive risk-taking. So when you encourage excessive risk-taking, it's like if I sent you to Vegas and said that you could gamble all you wanted and you get to keep all your profits, but I will cover all of your losses. You're going to engage in a more risky gambling experience than you would if you actually had to cover your losses as well. You'd be more astute and more calculating in your decisions. The same thing happened in the recent financial crisis, is that through the U.S. government, through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they set up a system where they said that they would bail out any corporation or that engaged it was too big to fail. So any corporation that engaged in even risky ventures, they were pretty much implicitly guaranteed that they would be bailed out by the federal government. So you had, just like if the Vegas story, just people engaging in excessive risk-taking. And that's because government took away that loss part of profit and loss. So that ended up in bankruptcy. Those resources, another thing that Peter J. Bedke brings up, another example, is that when you look at political markets, when a politician gets weeded out of the market, a corrupt politician gets weeded out of the market process, that's the market, or the or gets weeded out of the political process, that's the political process operating. That's the success of the political process. Same thing happens in bankruptcy in the market economy. It's success when companies that are misusing our resources or using resources that could be better utilized in producing other goods and services, they go under so those resources can be reallocated to where they belong. And when we prevent that process, we prevent bankruptcy and we subsidize losses, we're going to encourage excessive risk-taking and prevent resources from being reallocated to producing the goods and services that we want.
So what you're saying is maybe more banks should have failed after 2008, and we should have had a market economy that punished some people more severely. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. People that made poor decisions or engaged in excessive risk-taking should suffer the consequences of their decisions. And those resources should be reallocated to those that are the best at using those resources to provide the goods and services that we want.
So your story of the financial crisis is that there's been a long period of people intervening, policymakers dragging down Michael Phelps, basically, putting weights on him. And Michael Phelps is the market economy, capitalism, basically.
Yes.
And they've been burdening the capitalist economy more and more, making it more and more difficult for it to operate. Where does this idea that greed somehow got worse in 2008, where does that fit into your account? Did greed play any role in the crisis?
Well, certainly I think people are naturally going to be self-interested, and what capitalism does, Adam Smith and David Hume, who started this were part of the Scottish Enlightenment and started these ideas about free markets bringing about prosperity, recognized or said that we should assume that all men are self-interested in creating an economic system. And capitalism does this. It assumes man at his worst and puts him in an institution that encourages man in his own self-interest to serve other people. So it's only when government intervenes and subsidizes those losses or bails out people that have gone into bankruptcy that we encourage that excessive indulgence in self-interest, where people engage in riskier and greedier propositions than they would otherwise if they were curtailed by the fear of loss.
Yeah, back to your Las Vegas example,
yes.
Essentially. I'll go to Las Vegas every time if you're going to bail out my losses.
Absolutely.
That sounds like a fun trip, in fact. I don't gamble, but that would be a real delight if you're going to pay for my gambling. You mentioned Too Big to Fail, and there's actually a book out and a HBO movie, I believe, Too Big to Fail. I think it does a nice job of capturing the different players in high corporate finance in the post-2008 period. If we're now in a world where banks, in fact, are too big to fail, we're just not going to let them fail, can we even talk about the American economy as one that's open, that's a capitalist economy? Last week I told viewers that we're still a pretty free country, but there are certainly some challenges going forward. What's your view on what America even is today? Is it a capitalist economy or is it something else?
Well, historically, the U.S. has been at the forefront of economic liberty around the world. But in the recent decades, you have seen, especially in most recent years, in the Economic Freedom Index, there's a couple different indexes out there measuring the degree of economic freedom of the different nations in the world. And the placement of the U.S. has been falling as other nations have surpassed the U.S. in economic freedom. And as I mentioned, there's a robust and strong correlation between economic freedom and prosperity and standard of living that we enjoy. So as we take steps backward, whether it's because of a misguided perception of the financial crisis, or whether it's because in response to terrorist attack that we go back to more government, we can expect that the standard of living, the health measures that we enjoy, our happiness, will, if we look at the evidence, go down if we continue to fall back and become less capitalistic and depend more on government provision of goods.
So are there things we can do to reverse some of these trends besides just trying to declare let's stop too big to fail. What can be done to at least try to keep the U.S. at a pretty good level in terms of its economic freedom, if it matters so much in terms of economic growth and living longer and, you know, us having more stuff as well? Can we do something?
Yeah, absolutely. What we're doing right now is part of the process. As I mentioned, one of the best ways to ensure that democracy is successful in obtaining the ends that we employ it to obtain is to completely understand and study its pitfalls and dangers. Studying the works of James Buchanan, Milton Friedman, Thomas Sowell, there's a lot of scholars that have dedicated their careers to understanding these pitfalls of democracy and relying excessively on government. And if we encourage people to look to them, educate more people about the relationship between economic freedom and prosperity, I think we can start to roll back or at least limit the growth of government and allow us to maintain the prosperity and standard of living that we've become accustomed to.
That's really great. And of course, the Johnson Center, you being a new employee of the Johnson Center, know that that's what our mission's about. You know, through educational programs like this one, through educating our students, we're trying at the margin, just a tiny little bit, to you know, change things in a positive way, both nationally and here in Alabama. Because I think, like you said, if you look at the data, it's unambiguous that we have succeeded because of the fact that we're free. And it's preserving that's really the challenge, finding ways to make sure that going forward, you know, capitalism is at least on the table as an option, if not the prevalent one. We're running out of time. You must have been a student of Walter Williams at George Mason,
yes,
too. Yeah,
absolutely.
I didn't get a chance to have Walter Williams. I was at George Mason too, long before you. Didn't have a chance to have Walter for class, and it's a real shame I missed out.
Terrific
of course,
teacher.
he's on Rush Limbaugh from time to time,
Yes.
and just a great guy. But I appreciate you coming by and hanging out, and I'm really glad to have you as a colleague in the center. Thank you, viewers, for watching our show tonight. Please tune in next time for John Allison of BB&T. He'll be talking to us about the financial crisis of 2008, his experience as a bank executive throughout that crisis, and how that relates to capitalism and the themes we've been discussing so far.